Back in 2001 in Canberra, Australia, something happened that would change everything. It was October, 2 weeks after the world had been shaken by 9/11, and Australia's federal election campaign was in full swing. The Howard government had already been tested by the August Tampa standoff. The Norwegian freighter MV Tampa rescued hundreds of people from a sinking boat, and the government refused entry to Australian waters. Tensions about border security were raw, the media hungry for drama, and a nervous public primed for fear. Then the story landed. Asylum seekers had deliberately thrown their own children into the sea to force rescue and gain passage to Australia. Photographs were circulated. Ministers spoke in stern, moral tones. Prime Minister John Howard delivered a line that would define the campaign. "We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances of their arrival." The image was straightforward, ugly, and convenient. People so desperate they would endanger their children. For many voters, it was a clarifying moment, but the image was not the truth. Within days, an internal trail of intelligence, defense reports, and video footage began to tell a different story. The Department of Defense had intercepted communications and monitored a series of events at sea. They had footage and logs. Those official records did not support the sensational claim that parents had thrown children overboard to manipulate rescuers. In short, the story that had driven a national moral panic was contradicted by the government's own sources. What followed was not an instant correction. Instead, it became a study in how information and the deliberate shaping of it can become political currency. Ministers repeated the narrative, journalists relayed it in breathless headlines. The public reaction hardened. Border protection became not just policy, but a test of national will. On October 10, 2001, the Howard government was re-elected. The rhetoric about protecting Australia's shores and stopping people smugglers had real electoral payoff. By 2002, journalists and independent investigators were pressing harder. A Senate inquiry examined what had happened. Researchers, lawyers, and members of the public sought tapes and documents. When defense footage and contemporaneous reports were carefully examined, a clearer chronology emerged. There had been panic and confusion on a chronically overcrowded asylum seeker boat. A small number of individuals had indeed been in the water at various points during chaotic transfers or rescues, but the dramatic claim that parents had purposefully thrown their children into the sea as a tactic was not supported by the evidence. The Senate Select Committee concluded that the government had been supplied with material that showed the children overboard claim was false, and that some ministers had nonetheless persisted with assertions that misled both Parliament and the electorate. The report did not prosecute anyone criminally, but it did accuse senior officials of failing to ensure accurate public briefings, and it left a long shadow over public trust. Why did the claim stick? Part of the answer lies in the mechanics of modern politics. In the fog of a campaign, the careful sifting of intelligence is often replaced by rapid messaging. A photograph taken at an awkward angle, a clipped radio transmission, a hurried ministerial brief can be amplified into a simple story. Simplicity carries power. Complex humanitarian realities, people fleeing persecution, overcrowded boats, confusion during rescue operations, do not always fit the frames political campaigns need. The children overboard version did. But there was more than opportunism at play. The incident occurred at a hinge point in Australia's approach to asylum seekers. Within months, the government enacted the Pacific Solution, the interception and offshore detention of asylum seekers on Nauru and in Papua New Guinea. That policy was designed to deter boat arrivals, and it reshaped Australia's legal and moral stance on asylum processing. Critics would later argue that the rhetoric of 2001, stoked in part by the children overboard assertions, created the political cover necessary for policies that would lead to long, punitive detention and human suffering offshore. For the men, women, and children at the center of the story, the consequences were immediate and harsh. Whether or not any child had been deliberately put into the water, families were processed as security risks, pulled into an expanded system of interception and detention, and faced years of uncertainty. The narrative used to justify policy became inseparable from the lives it affected. As evidence mounted, the government's handling of the affair became a test case in institutional accountability. Defense Department logs, radio transcripts, and boarding reports showed that the initial claims had been exaggerated. Officials later admitted that language in ministerial statements had gone beyond the verified facts available to them. The breach was not simply an error in reporting, it was an error that advantaged a political strategy and was not swiftly corrected. The Senate committee's findings described a culture in which political considerations had influenced the way information was released and used. The fallout went beyond Canberra's corridors. Children overboard became shorthand for the willingness of political actors to use or to allow to be used emotionally charged but unverified claims to shape public opinion. Journalists who had leapt on the story faced sharp questions about haste and verification. Civil society organizations, lawyers, and asylum advocates demanded better processes for verifying claims about vulnerable people and for holding ministers and departments to account when they misled the public. There is an often cited bitter irony in the public's reaction. The fear generated by the story fortified a politics of fear in which a leading party derived electoral benefit from appearing uncompromising on security. Yet the party's own records undercut the very evidence it had used to justify that stance. The consequences, both immediate and institutional, endured. The Pacific solution set a template for offshore processing that governments of different stripes later adopted, refined, and at times defended in court. The incident widened the gulf between public expectation and the opaque mechanics of national security decision-making. A decade and more after the affair, Australians would return again and again to the questions it raised. How should democracies handle the release of sensitive information during election campaigns? How can officials ensure that intelligence and operational reports are not weaponized in political strategies? What mechanisms exist to quickly correct the public record when mistakes are made by those in power? The public answers were partial. The Senate inquiry produced a public accounting of what went wrong. Media organizations tightened internal verification processes. Civil society organizations used the scandal as a rallying point for advocating for the rights of asylum seekers and for better oversight of immigration and defense agencies. Yet the basic political lesson remained. A vivid lie can travel faster and farther than a cautious correction. For the families who crossed oceans in fraught vessels, the children overboard episode mattered because it changed the world into which they arrived or were prevented from arriving. For Australia's democracy, it mattered because it revealed how quickly the institutions that mediate truth, the Department of Defense, ministerial briefings, and the parliamentary system, can be bent into the service of political urgency. And so, more than 2 decades later, when debates flare again over borders, asylum, and the public use of classified or unverified information, that October in 2001 is still invoked, a moment when an explosive claim, amplified at precisely the right political moment, helped redraw the map of Australia's moral and policy landscape.